Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And here we are. Hello, everybody. This is Marco Ciappelli on Redefining Society podcast, ITSPmagazine Podcast Network. My channel, as if you've been following, we talk about a lot of things because almost everything nowadays revolve around society, technology. I mean, technology is everywhere. And I leave cybersecurity to other experts. I like to kind of look into the past, the present, and the future. And sometimes in this conversation, we go philosophical, and sometimes we can look at the dystopian scenario, the utopian scenario, and, we use our fantasy and our knowledge. In this case, actually, we're going to talk about something related to things that are happening nowadays. They're very relevant in the global stage, still related to technology, but very much related to politics, economics, and all of that. And for the people watching the video, Bill is here. And for the people listening, still, Bill is here. How are you doing, Bill, today?
Hi, I'm Bill Echikson, and I'm based in Brussels.
Okay.
I work with the Center for European Policy Analysis, where I edit. I'm a senior fellow, and I edit the what we call the bandwidth column, because just as you were describing, we, a Washington-based think tank, or think tanks are beginning to, that are traditionally just talking about geopolitics, defense, and security, are waking up to the fact that technology and tech policy is key to geopolitics these days. Who controls semiconductors controls the world in many ways, and controls the future. So that's what we are here to discuss, I believe.
That sounded very 1984, who control the past, control the future. But
it wasn't meant to be dystopian.
That's my brain.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I started my career as a journalist, so I know what you're doing, provoking me, which is good. And then I earned my tech chops by 7.5 years at Google, and I do believe that the rise of the internet has, really spread democracy, or it democratized access to information. It really changed the world. When I was starting out as a journalist a long time ago, I had to use a typewriter and use the subway and go up to the telegraph office to send my articles, which would then be read 2 days later. So I really do believe the internet, makes life a lot easier and gives me much more access to information to discuss. And we can also talk about the downsides of that free flow of information.
I'm going to invite you already officially to come back, and we will have this conversation where we're talking about how media have changed through the time. And I that's actually something that I really enjoy discuss. But today, actually, we're talking about, you mentioned semiconductor, and the reason what suggested to me, I guess, is because there was this article that you guys wrote about the Camp David Pact, and it's something that happened not too long ago. August 21st was the article when you publish it, and it's the USA, Japanese, and South Korean leaders. They signed a security agreement, which has pretty much China in focus, and there are military repercussion here. There is, I think, patents. I think there is high tech, probably artificial intelligence going in. So for people that maybe have heard the news and they are afraid of, what does it mean, this tech that goes in the hands of the enemy, which I hope it's not something that we need to be afraid of, but certainly there is competition, and certainly there are consequences. So what's the big picture here?
So I think the big picture is this breakthrough meeting at Camp David, bringing together our big allies in Asia, South Korea, and Japan, was supposed to be a lot about defense, missiles and rockets and airplanes, jet planes fighting over the Taiwan Straits and so forth. And it was about security. But the subtext, and that's what we were writing about, was that there was a lot of technology component to this. And I think semiconductors are a good illustration. The United States and its allies want to stay ahead of China. They don't want to be dependent on China for advanced technologies. And to do that, to achieve that goal, Camp David was talking about how we need to work with the Japanese and the South Koreans and our allies here in Europe to prevent China from surpassing us and threatening us with their ability to wield technology, but also that we're not held back because they're able to control critical minerals or able to dominate production of the most sensitive technologies. So there was an element of this Camp David Accord that was crucial about military matters, but also about working together to de-risk, is the word we're using these days, from China.
So I like to ask myself, what would the audience ask, right? So I'm assuming at this point that a lot of people may be thinking, wait a minute, isn't most of the technology that we get in the US, in Europe, and in other part of the world actually made in China? I mean, if you think a big company that are American or European, they do have manufactured there. So number one, even the short of microchip during the pandemic where you couldn't find the car, the connection is there. The market is global. And as far as I know, I think South Korea works a lot with China, and that's, I guess, why it was a very important meeting and the Pact, this one here. Yes. So just to put things into perspective and maybe look a little bit back, how did we get here where China, I feel like we've been kind of the Western country and the advanced country that kind of empower China to have this kind of technology. And
yeah, I mean, to be sure, we've integrated into a global economy where China has had a remarkable rise in the last couple decades. So I think, starting with Trump and the changes in China, I think it's on both sides. The tone really hardened, and the fears on each side were strengthened. The initial idea, I think, of the Biden administration as expressed was to decouple almost from China, but that's unrealistic. I mean, the allies, Japan, South Korea, Europe, and even the United States were too tied. So this idea of decoupling, I mean, when it was first announced under the Biden administration, that security trumped economic in all cases, I think they've walked that back a little bit. We have agreed on the term de-risking, making ourselves less reliant on China and making sure that China can't use its economic power to cause security threats. I think that's a general agreement. It's a term that was invented here in Europe by the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, and then adopted by the Americans. And now at Camp David, I think really adopted by the South Koreans and Japanese. So the question is how do we fill that in? How do we achieve that goal? And that's what we still have to see how it works. And it's going to be tough.
It's kind of like you declare the intention. Now we figure out how to get
I mean, but there are some elements that we can already see and that are visible. We can see that the United States has put export controls on the most advanced semiconductor technology. So the most advanced NVIDIA chips, for example, that are doing the generative AI applications, those aren't going to be able to be exported to China. we also see that the United States, to make this effective, this type of export controls, it needs its allies, because here in Europe, are the most advanced imaging technologies, and the most advanced etching machines are made just a couple miles from where I'm sitting in the Netherlands. And that's, so we needed the export controls to include the Netherlands ASML company that makes those hard to duplicate machines. And the Dutch have agreed to follow the American lead. In Asia, again, the discussion in Camp David, we needed the South Koreans to avoid producing or replacing the NVIDIA chips or the most advanced technology. And the South Koreans have agreed. Samsung and Hynix are not going to withdraw from China. They're still going to sell to China. NVIDIA will too, but just not its most advanced materials. And the Japanese, who have a lot of the important also imaging technologies and chemicals that are needed in South Korea, are definitely are on board to limit the sales of that most advanced technology to China.
Right. Now, historically, I think this is important. If I remember, from my study and reading some news, I mean, South Korea and Japan, even if they're neighborhood, they don't have like such a friendly history. I mean, we can go back into actual invasion back in the days, but we need to look at the present. We need to look at the future. So this is also, from a political perspective, a big event.
Yeah, giant. In the spring, I visited both South Korea and Japan, and it's certainly raw. Japan occupied South Korea. The issue of forced prostitution, comfort women, and Japan's unwillingness to give what the Koreans consider an acceptable apology. But I was in Seoul the day that the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida visited, and I saw his motorcade roll by, and things are changing there too. I think on both sides there is movement. China is scaring the daylights out of them, and they're together, and they want the Americans to be in a closer embrace. This is a major. So talking defense security, Camp David represents a major strategic win for America. It's just that part of that strategic win has to also include tech policy.
Yeah, and I wanted to go there, not just to go to talk about other things, but to kind of show that you can't really detach technology, and this is kind of like at the core of all my conversation, from everything else, right? I mean, it's everything. It's synergic. Everything depends. If something happens here, happens there. It's cultural things that sometimes affect political and economic decision. And, it's not oftentimes people that talk tech, they like to think, well, tech is tech. Tech, it's a silo. It isn't.
You're right. It isn't just, our computers and our mobile phones. It really does. I think tech is really central now to geopolitics, and that's where CEPA, where I'm working, really has woken up and is, like other think tanks, embracing this idea that tech needs to be considered at the same level, if not even ahead of whether we're going to sell F-16s to or deploy the Marines somewhere, cyber warfare. Looking in China, I mean, this is, Elon Musk's control of Starlink is a major geopolitical security challenge for opportunity and challenge, I would say, for much of the world. So yes, I think the military and the policymakers have woken up that tech is something on the front lines.
Absolutely. Now, is there and I know there is a note on this in the article, like, is there a potential counterproductive
yes, I mean,
situation that will be developing because of this? I mean, what could be the downfall of
the downfall is when you start I mean, part of the tech policy that we're talking about in Alliance is subsidizing production at home. So actually, much of the production comes from Taiwan, so under threat and at risk from Chinese invasion and so forth. So there is a sense that as much of the production of this material has moved to South Korea and Taiwan, the United States and Europe both want to start subsidizing semiconductor production. And we've seen big investments from European governments, particularly the German government, to entice both the chip makers, Intel and Taiwan Semiconductor, to build huge plants outside of Berlin. The United States, with its CHIPS Act, is subsidizing foundries all over the United States. So there is a sense that we are going to subsidize and use protectionism, and sometimes that can backfire because you end up sort of getting lazy on government money and not feeling that you need to innovate as fast as possible. I think we use the example in various articles of restrictions that we put on export controls we put on satellites to say 20 years later we looked at it and we'd lost competitivity by protecting our own industry. So that's the boomerang, the potential boomerang that could be put if we become very statist in our tech policy.
Well, now I'm going to put my idealist hat on, and I look at, for example, India just landed a rover on the moon. Russia didn't. There are things that I always look at, and I actually have the opportunity to talk with many astronauts on my show, and when you have the overview effect and the collaboration that we've seen in the International Space Station, it show that when you do things together, the humanity take advantage of it. And when we try to do it alone or in different groups and compete one another, it's really tough, because on one side, competition can help. And the other side, you would think like, what if we were all be able to think together and just have the same objective? So big philosophical angle here, but I'd love to know your opinion.
But it can be much simpler. NVIDIA no longer can sell its most expensive chips to China. That's a big customer that's being taken off the market. In the end, that means NVIDIA will have less money. NVIDIA's problem now probably isn't quite that, because it can't produce enough to satisfy Western customers, but it loses a big customer. Its profits go down. It has less money to put into research, and boomerang. You have a company that could have been more successful than it's allowed to be because we're in this tech Cold War with China. So, I mean, that's where it becomes a balancing act, right? We're still allowing American, South Korean, Japanese companies to sell chips to China because also it's a giant market, and Apple computers are still being assembled in China, so they need to have the chips there. So this is where the world is no longer black and white and becomes in grays, and where it becomes tricky and a balancing act. So we all agree we want to de-risk from China, but we don't really know what the full extent of de-risking is, or exactly the right balance to be when de-risking becomes sort of dangerous for ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So two questions. One is, and again, the audience may ask that, isn't China advanced enough on technology by learning how to do all these things, and they have bright minds over there? I mean, it's not the China of Marco Polo.
No.
So do we really say like, look, we're not giving you this anymore, and all of a sudden your progress stop? Hard to believe.
It is. It's a really good question. I believe China reacted to the Camp David Accords with sound and fury, anger. It certainly wasn't wasn't happy. In our research, we have shown, in semiconductors at least, that China still is struggling to reach the same level of success as the latest Western technology and the tininess of the components are going in, the wafers going into the chips. They certainly have nothing to compare with ASML in the Netherlands of these laser imaging machines needed to produce chips. They haven't reached the Taiwanese level of sophistication. And we're kind of skeptical that they can, at least in the short term. So while China can pour state subsidies and certainly has made incredible advances, we're kind of optimistic that we can stay ahead of them. Time will only tell if that's a naive assumption, but I also think not. It's pretty naive to believe the Chinese can just catch up in every area, especially with their economy that's sort of struggling and a system that, while impressive, an authoritarian system that doesn't really allow for much confidence in the future in some ways, or much freedom to innovate.
Now, I don't know if it's a consequence of these or other things, but just a couple of days ago, if not yesterday, in the news, there was something that there was an opening in the conversation now with China, like that they are willing to, come at the table and discuss. And so I don't know if that's the reason, but I think that when you're facing such alliance, you need to calm down a little bit, right?
Well, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo was just in Beijing.
Right. Yeah.
I think the American attitude over the last year has definitely softened. Back in a year ago, when the first export controls or the first Biden export controls, I think, were announced or reinforced, the talk really was pretty hard line, decoupling, security trumps economics. And then we've seen the American officials roll that back over this past year, and I think several have made recent trips to Beijing to try to get a dialogue going, because we are interdependent, and decoupling where Apple makes none of its computers in China isn't realistic and isn't necessarily good. At the same time, from the Chinese perspective, we see their economy slowing, their challenges mounting, and their aggressiveness in a lot of their foreign policy boomeranging and scaring their neighbors. So I think we'll see. It's going to be a tricky, as we were discussing, a tricky balancing act, but I do think we need to come up with a transparent definition of what de-risking means, and it means still working together while lessening fears on both sides.
Yeah. Well, politics is the art of compromise. So eventually, we all yell and say something and threat, and then we all hope that it's not going to come down to turning those threats into actions. Sometimes the yelling it's enough, and I hope that's the case. One last question, and then I have another one, but it's nothing to do with this. It's something I saw in your bio. I'm going to ask you to end this conversation, but related to this, the role of the European community in this, and is it kind of like a mediator position, or why is there a pact similar that can take place? Or
well, I mean, it's a good question again. The transatlantic alliance has always been central to America's post-war American foreign policy. We have a military alliance, NATO. We didn't have such a tripartite pact as in Asia with South Korea and Japan. And I think these conversations are going on with Europe at the same time. I mean, we discussed the ASML and the way the Dutch and the Europeans joined export controls against
commercially
China.
speaking, is there are they part of this agreement because the fact that they are already allies from a military perspective? That does imply that you need to be also taking these steps from an economic perspective?
They were directly involved in the Camp David Accord and their the European relationship with the Asian allies is somewhat different. They don't have the same military presence as the United States. On the other hand, the Europeans have done a free trade deal with Japan most recently, and with South Korea even before that. And I believe these are global discussions. I happened to be in Hiroshima when there was the G7 discussion and the South Korean president came. At Hiroshima, a lot of these same topics came up about de-risking from China. The subtext of the conference in Hiroshima was the Chinese threat and how to manage and deal with that threat. So that was a precursor to what happened in regionally with the Camp David Accord. But this is, the alliance. All the democracies in the world are facing a threat from a rising autocracy. Russia is sort of a tech minnow. Isn't an economic threat. Definitely a security threat, and China is both a security and tech threat at a different level, and that's why I think we were talking in Camp David, Hiroshima, be it with all the Europeans, Americans, and Asian democracies together about how to respond, and that's the big challenge, I think, geopolitically for the next decade at least, more than Russia, which is a regional actor and a regional danger.
Right. And then, we hear a lot of conversation about risk in that case when we talk about cybersecurity, because the hacking groups and the damage that you could do by doing other things. But, well, Bill, I really appreciate this conversation. I hope it clarifies a lot of things for our audience, and, the great perspective looking at the past, the present, and also the possibility for the future. I want to finish this on a completely different angle. Like, I saw that you wrote a book on the history of the Bordeaux wine region. Yes. And do we see a risk of having to stop exporting that as well, or Chianti?
Well, I know that wine has been a constant tension. Whenever America gets mad, it slaps tariffs on Bordeaux wine. The book actually was, I have written a lot about food and wine as a journalist, and the book really was about American-European relations. It was about an American wine critic who shook up the social standing in Bordeaux, shook up allowed guys in the garage to make wine that was as expensive as the old noble rot in their big chateau. So I think wine and food is also a good window onto society, and I've always been interested in that. Tech is as well now, how we feel about the digital world, and I would say, I'm trying to bring the same sort of colorful writing to tech policy. Check us out at Bandwidth, it's called, at CEPA.org. And yes, I will write about wine technology as much as I will about
which there is a lot of technology and AI in agriculture and wine production as well. So that's another great topic to discuss. But I wanted to go there.
A meal too. I wrote a book about a great French chef who had 2 Michelin stars and wanted a 3rd, and so. And
maybe you come on my other show, the Audio Signals, and we talk about the book and the storytelling parts. So see, this was a great connection. But I want to end up by saying that we have been open and known about CEPA's work for a time now, and is a Center for European Policy Analysis. And I'm sure we'll have more guests on the show, because it's definitely relevant, and I love the way that you're being very above the parts and very looking at things from different perspective. And again, I want to thank you for this really, really interesting conversation. And I will put the links to the article, to your social media if you want to, and people that listen can find this on the notes, get in touch with you, the publication, and comment, share, subscribe, all of that. So again,
Thanks.
Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was fun.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.